Started then. Our session this morning is late-breaking news. And I get the honor to introduce our first presenter. 4 years ago in Las Vegas at our last in-person conference, Dr. Lauren Moore at that time was getting her doctorate at the University of Michigan, and she was on stage talking about her ataxia journey within her own family. Today, Dr. Moore is our Chief Scientific Officer here at the National Ataxia Foundation. What a story that is. So please welcome to the stage Dr. Lauren Moore with our late-breaking news. There we go.
There you go. All right, is my mic working? Everyone can hear me? All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to AAC. I can't tell you how nice it is to see all of your faces again and to be back here in Las Vegas. As Joel mentioned, it was 4 years ago that I gave a talk here in Las Vegas, just down the street at the Flamingo. But what I wanted to remind myself of as I prepared for this talk is 9 years ago, I attended my first AAC as a first timer. And it was very scary, it was very overwhelming, and I was attending as a family member. I had just recently learned the word ataxia and was only just starting to understand what that meant for me and my family. So for all of you first timers here, welcome. We're so glad that you're here. I know it can be scary and overwhelming, but this really is a really wonderful community, and I hope you have a chance to meet many people here and learn about all of the really exciting research and drug development happening in ataxia. Just to get started, so this is the late-breaking news section of the talk, but I wanted to first highlight some late-breaking NAF news. Let me figure this out. So as Joel mentioned, I began my real tenure at the National Ataxia Foundation about a year ago as the first Chief Scientific Officer. And as Andrew mentioned earlier, our staff and our revenue has almost doubled, or has doubled over the last couple of years. I've highlighted just a few of the new roles that we've been able to hire at the National Ataxia Foundation. And in fact, the research department, which I lead, has doubled in just my tenure. So some of you may be wondering, what have we been able to accomplish with more than 2 times the revenue and 2 times the workforce? So let's talk about how we're spending your money, especially the money that's coming from our donors. So in just the 5 years, I looked back at our grants and looked at all of the different diseases that we have been able to cover with our annual grant funding, as well as some other special grants. And so I've listed quite a few of them here. There's over 30, and these are just the actual diseases that were the main focus of the grants. And anyone who's in research will know that the findings that you find from one research project, especially in rare diseases like ataxia, can have much bigger impacts in other diseases. And we've been able to learn a lot about ataxias and work towards treatments. So I wanted to highlight just a few things that our NAF-funded grants have been able to contribute to. I was able to identify more than 5 different research grants that led to the creation of a new mouse model of ataxia. So when we're talking about these new and rare diseases, it's absolutely critical to be able to develop models of the disease, so not just a single lab can study that disease, but many labs throughout the country and the world can now study and learn about that disease. So we've been able to fund multiple creations of mouse models. We actually have played a major role in the discovery of new ataxia genes and ataxia types. We know that about 70% of folks, including those in this room, do not actually have a diagnosis and do not know what their ataxia is caused by. We have several grants who have actually focused on the discovery of new genes. We've also developed multiple clinical scales and biomarkers, and some of those are actually actively being used in clinical trials today, and improving the clinical trial design and making it more efficient to have drugs assessed in clinical trials. We've identified multiple potential therapies and drug targets for ataxias. We know that drug development can take over 10 years, but we're well on our way for many different ataxia types due to many of our NAF grants that have been funded over the last few years. I'm very excited that last year that we initiated the first in human clinical trials to assess gene therapies for ataxias. And so we're very excited that you can trace kind of the roots of that back to some early grant funding for postdoc research and actually to some of the labs that I worked in prior to joining the NAF. And then also I wanted to highlight that we now have developed these large biorepositories or libraries of patient blood, patient CSF, as well as donated postmortem brain and spinal cord tissue. We also have been able to collect a lot of natural history data. In fact, NAF funded over 200 clinical visits last year alone. All of these together will continue to contribute to ataxia research and have really far-reaching impacts throughout the world and over the years to come. I also wanted to highlight that in the big scheme of things, the size of our NAF grants are relatively small. The largest NAF grant that we give is about $100,000, whereas some of these NIH large grants can be in the multi-millions. But I really want to highlight that these small grants actually do have really huge impacts. And in a recent survey of some of NAF's recently funded grants, we were able to find that when we put $1.8 million into these research grants, those early preliminary studies were able to then apply to these larger funders such as the NIH and increase our impact by more than twofold with new grant money coming in to support the continuation of these projects that we initiated. I also wanted to highlight, this was just one great quote from one of our funded researchers who said, "Thank you again for the support. We have very encouraging results, and this funding helped us collect the preliminary data necessary to partner with other charitable foundations to work on therapeutic development." So this is that bringing the more money into the field. And then further, it really helped me transition to a faculty position. NAF has supported me at multiple stages of my postdoc, which is the stage right before you either go into industry or become a professor. And in this case, this individual did become a professor. And he says, "I don't think I'd be where I'm at in my career without the support you've given to my work." So this is just one example of a very small grant. In this case, it would have been less than $50,000, but it led to him being able to establish his own research lab, become a full-time professor, and now will spend the next 20 plus years training the next generation of ataxia researchers. So these small grants really have far-reaching impacts. One thing that I know personally as a scientist and a family member is that we are not good at translating those research advancements back to the patient community, especially to those who have contributed to research. And so I'm very excited that last year we were able to partner with this really exciting patient blog called SCA-Source that develops, it's a big consortium of volunteer scientific writers and editors who take very cutting edge and recent publications and rewrite them in these summary reports in a way that patients can understand. So I really was excited last year that one of the first things I was able to do was partner with SCA-Source and make all this content available to you and continue the SCA-Source goal of translating research advances to patients in an accessible manner. And even more exciting late-breaking news is we'll be having a new hire at the NAF. In the next couple of weeks, we'll be hiring Dr. Celeste Suart, who is one of the co-founders and co-editors of the SCA-Source, who will be joining the research team as the patient engagement manager, and she'll continue to expand these resources directed to patients so that we can all understand how exciting the research advancements are in ataxia research. And I just wanted to highlight one of the most recent articles to be your SCA 27B, which highlights one of the brand new ataxia genes that was recently discovered and announced actually last year at a NAF research conference. So in addition to SCA-Source, we want to make not only research, but other information and resources more available to our community. And so I've just highlighted here the number of webinars that we have published and added to our YouTube page over the last couple of years. And you can see that we really have this kind of exponential growth in the number of webinars. Of course, this was triggered by the COVID pandemic, but I think that we can all agree that this is a real benefit. And so, for example, this year we launched a series of disease-specific seminars so that eventually every one of the over 200 ataxia disorders will have seminars and resources and material on our website that's available to you. So you can learn about your disease specifically. We've already had 9 seminars this year, and we have over 30 planned for the coming year, so very excited about that. Andrew Rosen also mentioned that this year we're launching this Ataxia Center of Excellence. I know for my family, we were very lucky in that my dad, after he was diagnosed, was able to see one of the leading experts in his disease at the University of Michigan. But we know that many of the individuals in this room are not that lucky and aren't able to access neurologists or primary care physicians that are very knowledgeable in their disease. And many times I know that you all have been in the room where you have to actually teach your doctor or your nurse or your PT or your OT about ataxia. And I don't think that that's right. I think that everyone should be able to have a trusted, knowledgeable source who's able to give them information about their disease and their future. So we initiated this program to start designating those centers that really are experts in ataxia care and diagnosis. We've already received over 15 applications this year, and we hope to name the very first designated centers at the beginning of May. But we know that not everyone is going to be able to visit just those designated centers, so it's really important to start training and prepare for the next generation of ataxia clinical experts. So I've set this ambitious goal of training over 200 ataxia specialized neurologists over the next 5 years. And the way that we're going to do this is we initiated this educational program called the Ataxia Clinical Training Program. It's actually taking place right down the hall. And this is our first in-person ACT, where we're going to be training 35 fellows about the cutting edge in ataxia research, ataxia clinical care, and ataxia diagnosis. And they'll be learning from some of the experts in the ataxia field. So I'm very excited that we're going to have our first cohort of ataxia specialized neurologists. And next year, I think we're just going to continue to grow this program. And finally, I wanted to highlight our work in helping patients be able to actually receive a diagnosis. As I mentioned, we know about 70% of people don't know what ataxia type they have, either because the genes haven't been discovered yet or because they don't have access to genetic testing. So in February of 2022, we launched our first no-cost genetic counseling and genetic testing program. This was specifically for 3 of the most common dominantly inherited ataxias, SCA1, 2, and 3. And since its launch about a year ago, we've been able to provide over 180 free virtual genetic counseling visits, over 80 genetic test results for individuals who are at risk for SCA1, 2, and 3. And I'm very happy that in the surveys that we put out following participation in this program, 97% of our survey, 97% of the survey respondents stated that they would recommend this program to a family member. So I think this has really been a great success, and we hope to continue to expand this in the future. We know that SCA1, 2, and 3 is just a subset of the ataxia types represented in this room, and so we really are working hard to continue to provide accessible genetic testing and diagnostic testing for everyone in many different ways beyond this program. And then finally, I just want to really stress that there's been a focus, a refocusing on the patient voice and the patient role in research and drug development. I've seen this myself. There's been much more increased interactions and meetings with even ourselves, me and Andrew, and the FDA. Many of you may have participated in the Voice of the Patient, which was a very exciting FDA initiative a couple of years ago, where we were able to talk directly to the FDA about the ataxia patient experience and needs. We've also seen a development of new government-funded initiatives and funding sources that are specifically dedicated to ataxia research and drug development. As Andrew mentioned, through the Drug Development Consortium, we formalized partnerships between NAF and industry leaders in ataxia drug development. And through that initiative, we've completed many patient panel discussions. And even recently at this meeting, we had an advisory board with one of the leading companies to discuss the patient needs and the patient experience and what we want from drug development. So before I close, I just wanted to thank everyone who's here or chiming in from home, for everyone who has contributed in some way to ataxia research, either through your precious time, your energy, or your expertise. All of this has combined to help drive drug development forward, and I think our next presentation is going to really highlight where all of those efforts have led. And so with that, I'm going to close and introduce our next speaker, Don Burr, who's the Chief Commercial Officer at Reata, to discuss the very first FDA-approved treatment for ataxia.
Thank you, Dr. Moore, and good morning, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here with you today. And on behalf of Reata Pharmaceuticals, I really wanted to thank you all for, number one, allowing us to join you this week, and then also giving me a little bit of time with you this morning. So I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Reata Pharmaceuticals, and what does that actually mean? So I lead a department that's responsible for getting an approved drug to a patient. So first, you have to see development and regulatory success before a drug is ever approved. And so we are absolutely thrilled that we now have a first and only approved treatment for Friedreich's ataxia. And it's a remarkable milestone. We did not do this on our own, by the way. This took a tremendous community effort. It's really a remarkable partnership if you think about how this all came together. And so I'm not a scientist, I am not a researcher, but I've been asked to share with you a little bit about our journey and how we arrived from the lab all the way straight through to an approved drug with the FDA, and really what a remarkable community effort this really was. And it's an example of what can happen again. So I think it holds a lot of promise. So not a very pretty slide, but a very important slide. So I want to be really clear that the information contained today is FYI only. It's just for your information. And Reata and the National Ataxia Foundation also agree that it's very important that you seek medical guidance from your healthcare provider. And then products mentioned today during my presentation are not endorsed by NAF. So what is Friedreich's ataxia? You know, I get that question often, and many people don't know, because truthfully, it is an ultra-rare, progressive neuromuscular disease. It's inherited. It affects a very, very small patient population. In the United States, we believe there's about 6,000 patients, but today we know that there are about 5,000 currently diagnosed. So really tiny patient population, and considered in the United States ultra rare. It's a very serious and progressive disease, and it's typically diagnosed when kids are just teenagers. It's a time when kids are just kids and they're in school, they're enjoying friends, they might have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, they're thinking about driving, they're playing sports, and probably considering college. And it's just relentlessly progressive. So people lose their mobility, their ability to walk, to talk, and it's really unfortunate that for so long there's not been a treatment available at all, but there is today. And so the community was very, very involved to help see this through. And they worked for decades to together advance drug development. And so what specifically did this community do? This community of patients, healthcare providers, investigators, and FARA, or the Friedreich's Ataxia Research Alliance, well, they created a better understanding of the patient journey, the mechanism of the disease, and the course of the disease. And they did this through a very robust patient registry that also lent to their natural history study. And you're gonna see how this natural history study became so important in the drug approval. They supported research and development through grants and fundraising, just like what you're doing here, and really truly helped to lay the foundation for future drug development. And this was so important because to develop a drug, you have to know what the endpoint is that you're studying. So remarkably, this community was able to identify mFARS as a viable endpoint in clinical trials, and that's the endpoint that we studied. Working with the FDA and finding a regulatory path, this community also helped to design and develop robust trials. So another question that comes up very often is why does drug development take so long? There are so many patients in need of a treatment. And the very, very simple answer is the FDA is charged with only approving drugs that have been shown to be safe and effective. Safe and effective, absolutely critical. And so the process to get there and the steps that a manufacturer needs to go through to develop a drug are lengthy and long. Starting in the lab where a compound is often identified or created, it cannot be tested until there is documentation in preclinical studies or animal studies that this will likely be safe in human. And through those studies, we also get to determine what is an appropriate dose to start testing in patients. And then the FDA certainly requires very rigid, robust clinical trials that will support both efficacy and safety. From phase 1 and phase 2, where proof of concept happens, where we start to see that a drug is effective in a particular therapeutic area, then we also get to learn what's the appropriate dose, how are patients responding, and then a phase 3 well-controlled trial will give us long-term efficacy and safety. And all of this, as you can see, can take a very long time. But then with this body of evidence, if it's successful, this can then go to the FDA. And the FDA will take their time to review it and also deem, is this both safe and effective? So a very, very important process that we all wish was a little bit quicker, but that's the reason for the time. And there's no guarantee at the end of this. So if you look at this funnel, you could see at the very top that only 1 in 20 to 30,000 compounds that start in the lab actually make it through to FDA approval. So you may ask, how did we get there? And that's actually a really great question. If the odds are stacked against you, how did we see a drug approval? Well, it took a village, there's no doubt. And this village of FA patients and caregivers, the FARA community, investigators, Reata, we really were in lockstep throughout this whole process. And it's truly, truly a remarkable story of collaboration that at the end really led to success. And so going back to 2014, this is when Reata was first engaged by FARA. Now, important to note, Reata was very busy investigating our NRF2 platform. That's our scientific platform. We were approached by FARA, who was asked by a patient and a caregiver to come and talk to Reata, because FARA and their KOLs and investigators had determined that NRF2 potentially plays a role in Friedreich's ataxia. So through that collaboration, FARA came to Reata back in 2014 and asked us to consider our research in this space. At the same time, FARA, the FDA, investigators did remarkable work to determine what is an appropriate endpoint for clinical trials. And as I mentioned, mFARS is what came out of that robust work. Reata engaged FARA, the FDA, and investigators to create and develop clinical trials that were then initiated. And fast forward to 2019, we had positive pivotal data, and the whole community celebrated. We were excited, FARA was excited, but the FDA needed more data. And so we had to put on a pause, push the pause button. But thank goodness for one thing. FARA had this robust patient registry and natural history data that we were then able to leverage with our own clinical data to then build a package for the FDA. And at this same time, the FA patient community found their voice, and they initiated a petition that actually garnered 74,000 global signatures, 2,000 patients, 35,000 from the United States, asking and requesting that the FDA accept our filing and review our drug. And so we pulled our package together in collaboration with that beautiful natural history data that we had access to because of FARA's work, submitted this additional data to the FDA, They designated priority review, and we just received approval about 4 weeks ago for the very first and only treatment for Friedreich's ataxia. So I'm sharing this story with you because it was such a collaborative process, and it can happen again. So this milestone actually happened on Rare Disease Day, which is so appropriate. And we all celebrate in this success. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more, please visit us at our booth out in the exhibit hall, or visit us on SKYCLARYS.com, where you can find a little bit more information about how to access treatment, and then potentially join a patient webcast if there's more interest. So again, we're thrilled, and we celebrate with the community about this recent advancement. And it really creates more promise and hope that we're going to see this again for another ataxia soon. So you learned that the community here plays a tremendous role. So you might be asking, what can you do? And it's really simple. Participate in a clinical trial or participate in a registry. Those are two ideal steps. And at the same time, stay engaged with advocacy and close to your physicians, because through those channels, you're going to find out about what opportunities exist for you. And with that, I'd like to close by saying thank you. We can't do this alone. No company can. In fact, it takes an entire community and one goal and that aligned plan. And we're very thankful for the patients, the caregivers, our investigators, and this collaborative work that at the end really created a new medicine for patients in significant need. So thank you so much for letting me join you today, and I think with that, I will turn it back over to Dr. Laura Moore.
Already, and I'm very excited to be joined here by Dr. Chip Wilmot. He's an associate professor and neurologist at Emory University who's been very actively involved for many years in the ataxia community and in clinical research. And I'm excited to bring him here today to talk a little bit more about what this approval means for both FA, but the ataxia community as a whole. So welcome and thank you.
Well, thank you. Good to be here. Can you all hear me? Yeah, there we go.
Mm-hmm. And he'll be the first to correct me in calling him Chip, so
I'm
welcome,
Chip.
Chip. So Chip, it's incredibly exciting to finally have this very first drug approved for any ataxia type, but I can't help but wonder, the first ataxia drugs were discovered over 30 years ago. Why did it take so long to have the first drug approved?
Well, as we just heard, the process takes so long. Up to about 15 years ago, we didn't even have a good way of measuring ataxia. And to really go from the collection of data of just understanding the disease for Friedreich's, how to measure it, how to understand how patients differ, which is very important because it influences your data collection in clinical trials. So we had to establish that. And then good candidate drugs had to become available. There were ideas based on what we know about what goes wrong in Friedreich's ataxia, but it is a very, there's so much work behind the scenes that I think can be easy to ignore, and it just needed to get done. The pandemic didn't help, slowed things down a little bit, I think, too. But I'm really excited that now we have something.
Mm-hmm. And so this new approved therapy is called SKYCLARYS, or omaveloxolone. Can you tell us a little bit more about this therapy? Is this is the cure for FA? Is this the very first treatment? What does this mean for the FA community?
First of all, it's groundbreaking in that it's the first, and I think we have to give it its absolute due, and Reata their due for doing the study and doing it in a way that we were able to obtain the data. The data is the data. People do show benefits on it, or else the FDA wouldn't have approved it. It is not a cure where you take the medicine for a little while and then poof, your FA is gone. It'd be nice to have that, and maybe someday we'll get to that point. But the data, really showed that patients who were on it compared to placebo did better. And that if you transition people so that everybody is taking it, but some people started off not taking it, the people who were on it earlier maintained that benefit over the long haul, which is good. And the extension study where we're continuing to follow patients who are on the medicine is still going on. So we're still continuing to collect data, which is important. But it does show a benefit. Patients who are on it, sometimes it isn't like you'll take it and you'll feel so much better. We think that the way that it works is predominantly through a slowing down of the progression of the disease. And because Friedreich's is kind of relentlessly progressive, but day to day you don't see a decline, I think it's going to be hard for patients to really recognize whether or not it's doing something in them. But that's a little bit yet to be seen. That's my personal opinion of what I think is going to happen. But again, the data shows that when you look at everybody who's on it versus not, or who were on it earlier, compared to people who weren't, or historical control patients that we derived from the natural history studies, that there is benefit there in the ataxia rating scales. So we're hopeful for having people be able to be on it and it benefiting them.
And I know this drug was specifically developed and tested and eventually approved for the treatment of FA. Do you think that this approval is going to lead to more therapies for other types of ataxias?
I definitely think it's going to lead to more therapies because, it's kind of a proof of principle. We use that term a lot in research. Once you do one thing, you show that, hey, this is possible. We can work with this patient community, the ataxia patient community, these organizations, and as if Reata was able to pull this together and get it approved, maybe we can do that for our drug. So it will encourage the entire field, I'm certain. The other question that would come up is this drug specifically, can we use SKYCLARYS for other conditions that are not Friedreich's? And right now we can't. This is a Friedreich's specific drug that was developed based on basic science research and understanding the mechanism that causes Friedreich's, what goes wrong in Friedreich's ataxia, and then this medicine tries to help correct that. And that wouldn't necessarily apply for other ataxias. So you can't just take this medicine for other ataxias, but I definitely think that there's going to be encouragement of development of other treatments for ataxia, which is going on, as we speak. So.
Mm-hmm. Great. So let's say you have FA. Does this mean that you can now get a prescription right away and go to your CVS or Walgreens down the street and get a prescription?
No. So this is a rare disease, and a lot of times medicines like this, and this is definitely true for SKYCLARYS, they work through a specialty pharmacy. So there's a specialized program with Reata has set up that physicians and patients will need to go through to get the drug. The first step to getting the drug would be contacting your physician. Most of the time that's going to be an ataxia physician because we understand the drug and how to approach the ordering of the drug. But people are allowed to go through any physician for this program in order to get the drug. But you can't just ask your local PCP for a prescription and take it to Walgreens or something. You will not get the drug that way. Yeah.
As a neurologist, what advice would you give to any patient, whether it's an FA patient or any other ataxia type, who feels like when they go to talk to their doctor either about new therapies or off-label prescriptions for ataxias, or any other clinical trial involvement and their doctor doesn't know about trials or isn't interested in learning about these trials or therapies, what would you recommend them to do?
That's a good question. Because, I mean, the world is so specialized, right? I mean, we're bombarded with information, and so I really think that subspecialty knowledge is important. So getting to an ataxia clinician who really specializes in ataxia is great. There aren't that many of us, and like I'm booked out. Anybody here who is one of my patients, you understand. I'm booked out way in advance because I don't see patients every day of the week at Emory, and I have a long, list of patients that need to be seen. So it can be hard to get into that subspecialist. So try to avail yourself of that. You can educate your doctor, and some doctors will be more receptive to that than others. You can point them to the National Ataxia Foundation. I hear that the National Ataxia Foundation is pretty good. So, if you can't get, it's like there's only a few people who really specialize in ataxia, but a lot of movement disorders physicians who are neurologists, movement disorders specialists, there's a lot of them around. Mostly they do Parkinson's and tremor, but they usually know a good bit about ataxia, not quite like the ataxia specialists, but a decent amount. So if you can get to an academic center, even if you can't get to an ataxia specialist, an academic center or to a movement physician, a movement disorders physician, that can help. And I would just point out that going on down the hall, we're training, set up by Lauren and Pravin, excuse
Dr.
me.
Kamani.
Yeah, Dr. Kamani. A training to increase the awareness of movement disorders fellows early in their training so that they can learn even more about ataxia. So a lot is going on right now to train more and more people so that we can avoid that situation.
Dawn mentioned during her talk how important natural history study data was to the eventual approval of SKYCLARYS. Can you define what natural history data is and what role it played in the approval?
Yeah, I mean, probably a lot of people in this room participated in some of those studies, but we need to understand the disease. And in order to do that, we have to, and it's critical that we know how to measure the disease. Because if we want to know if a medicine works, we have to know what the disease state is. Is it doing something? If we can't measure the disease, then we'll never know if something is working. You build that data by doing natural history studies where you simply examine patients, maybe do studies like pegboard tests or MRIs or maybe draw blood or a spinal tap, and you're just gathering data. You're not doing a clinical trial, you're not giving a drug, but you're gathering data on that ataxia. Because these are rare, it's really hard to do a good natural history study data in study in ataxia at one center. There's just not enough patients. So we have these collaborative natural history studies that gather data in a very standardized format throughout the country, and there's efforts to make that worldwide as well, where we can take those measurements and those values from MRIs or from blood work and be able to understand the progression rate, the variability from patient to patient, and the quality of the measurement tools. All of those things are absolutely fundamental to establish for a clinical trial. And it was critical for the development of SKYCLARYS, and it's also critical for other ataxias that we're working on studying.
So do you think this was kind of a one-off lucky success, or are there a lot more drugs coming down the pipeline for ataxias?
Oh,
beyond
I
FA?
mean, yeah, there's lots of things that people are working on. For the genetic ataxias, ultimately we always think about gene therapy and being able to replace or change that fundamental problem. That's complicated. That's really complicated. But that's one approach, and a number of companies are interested in that. There are lots of companies that are interested in just reversing some of the damage pathways that can occur. Sometimes they're specific for one kind of ataxia or another, but there is a very large discovery space that's happening right now, along with some clinical trials that are going on that we are trying to encourage and foster. And it's very important that I think people, despite how long it takes, not give up hope that new treatments for other ataxias and new treatments for Friedreich's beyond SKYCLARYS will be occurring in the future. And it's definitely going on right now and will continue to do so in the future.
Okay. So in our last 50 seconds of this session, what advice would you give to anyone in the room who is interested in helping push drug development forward?
Participate in natural history studies if you can. Be engaged with the support groups, NAF, FARA, other groups. Try to, number one, maintain a hopeful attitude for what's down the pike. Realize that if you are doing something and it's maybe, your clinical situation is more advanced, that what you do can still be so helpful for other people. Maybe other people in your family, maybe people that you don't know. But the whole community coming together is what is really important. Promote awareness, Ataxia Awareness Day and things along that lines. Lobbying. There's Ataxia on the Hill that the NAF has helped promote, and that has been a great activity because to get research support on the federal level or other levels is very important. Fostering and trying to develop more, doing what you can for fundraising. All that is good. Be engaged. Take advantage of the community of ataxia, because the community of ataxia, is one of our real strengths, I think.
All right, well, thank you so much, Dr. Wilmot, for all of those insights. Now we're going to be breaking for our morning Birds of a Feather sessions. You can find the different sessions that will be held in your program and their locations. And just once again, let's thank our speakers, Dr. Chip Wilmot and Don Burr.